The call came in on a Tuesday at 4:32 in the afternoon, late October. The sun already sliding behind the Blue Ridge, so the hollows of Shenandoah darkened early. Ranger Aislinn Keats was parked at mile marker 47 of Skyline Drive, just north of the Rapidan turnoff, a paper cup of station coffee cooling in the cup holder, and her radio tuned to the quiet channel they used for backcountry check-ins. The speaker breathed. Static arranged itself into a voice that did not sound like any of her crew. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Aislinn turned the volume wheel a notch. Out the windshield, the ridge was drawn in crosshatch, oaks and hickories going copper, the sky a pale thing you could scratch with your nail. The voice came again, precise, as if it were reading off a card. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Male, age 8. Name Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near the Old Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Hurricane Hazel expected to push in, winds rising. Request all available. Time is 16:30, October 14, 1954. The radio clicked off into snow. Then, faintly, the same message, identical down to the breath before the name. Aislinn stared at the handset. Their base was called Piney River Dispatch. Their tower names were Pinnacles and Hazeltop and Big Meadows. No one in the park had used Fox Hollow for decades. Her training cracked its knuckles. She keyed the mic. Piney River to unknown unit. Say again. Who is calling Fox Hollow Base? Silence laid itself over the car like a thin blanket. Beyond the glass, a crow moved from one bear snag to another as if demonstrating a diagram. The wind was a steady push from the southeast. Hazel. The word gave the hairs on Aislinn's arms ideas. She stepped out and let the door swing shut. The air had that warm edge you get before a storm that started somewhere else. Leaves chased each other along the asphalt, then lay down. In the trunk lay her day pack, a spare radio, and a copy of a paper map creased along the places everyone folds them. She slung the pack, checked battery levels, turned the spare to scan. The main radio kept its sulk. The spare found chatter from Big Meadows about a flat tire near Lewis Mountain, then returned to quiet. The old voice did not return. Aislinn keyed in to dispatch. Piney, Keats at 47. I caught a transmission, sounds like a vintage call. Reference to Fox Hollow, child missing near Corbin Run, date October 14, 1954. Could someone check the archive on that, see if we have a historical incident report? The dispatcher was a steady woman named Karen, who did not make noises she did not need. Copy, Aislinn. Stand by. Aislinn leaned on the hood and looked east, where the hills tumbled like knuckles, all green and copper and shadow. She had worked Shenandoah 5 seasons. She knew the way the ridges spoke when you asked them right. She also knew radios lie sometimes, bouncing off ducts of temperature and skipping across layers of ionized air like stones. She had heard voices from fire towers that had been torn down before she was born, and a farmer yelling to his brother on a frequency no longer assigned to anyone. She had never heard a date pinned to a hurricane whose name lived in the county's memory like a scar. Karen came back. We have a typewritten Keats, Incident 1954-H, filed at Piney River. Hurricane Hazel, multiple rock slides, a missing person in the Corbin area, that name you gave. It is a cold file. It does not say recovered. I repeat, not recovered. No remains located. Not closed. Aislinn pressed the radio to her shoulder until the plastic complained. Copy. Can you send scans to my phone? I'm heading down to the Corbin Run access. If anyone else is close enough to meet, let them know. There was a pause, a little breath that was not static. Karen's voice softened a shade, the way people do when the past finds a way to ask for your time. Sending now. Watch your footing, the trails are a mess of marbles with the leaves down. Want Dupre from Hazeltop on, stand by. Affirmative. Aislinn slung the pack across her back and looked once more at the ridgeline. A truck from Fleet rumbled past, the driver lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in that rural benediction. Clouds had started as a rumor and were now themselves. The Corbin Run access was a gravel pull-off hidden beneath tulip poplars that had learned to whisper. Aislinn eased the truck in sideways and cut the engine. She took the trail with her boots, making small promises to each rock. The stream voiced itself down the hollow knit of last week's rain and this afternoon's melt of a single stubborn snowpatch in a shadow under a ledge. The map told the story of the lower springhouse, a square of stones where water had been convinced to behave. Above it, a ledge with a scatter of quartz chips, the leftovers of older hands doing older work. Aislinn kept an ear on her radio and the other on the creek. She caught the place where a trail forgets itself and becomes deer. She found the old springhouse, its stones asking to be counted. She touched the edge of the low wall with the kind of gentleness reserved for quilts and engines. She did not say the boy's name. The afternoon pulled its shoulders in. The radio breathed again. Same cadence, same careful voice. Fox Hollow base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Request all available. Time is 16:30. October 14, 1954. Aislinn shivered in the warm air. Her eyes went to the spring house and its square of shadow. She moved the beam of her headlamp across the stones, not because she expected to see anything, but because light can sometimes rewrite a sentence the land is trying to say. The beam found a length of rust half buried in the moss along the back of the foundation, thin as a butter knife, with a clip and a circle at one end. She crouched. A whistle. Army surplus by the look of it. She teased it free, the moss unwilling to let it go. The metal had pitted and softened into a river-colored thing. She wiped it once against her sleeve, then regretted the act. Her radio clicked and made a sound she had not heard in years, a squelch from another era. Karen came back on. Keats. Dupre is on the way from Hazeltop Tower, 20 minutes if the drive is kind. Archives show the boy was last seen by his father near the spring house, yes. The father left him to fetch his jacket from the car. Weather shifted, heavy gust pushed through, child gone when he returned. Tracks lost near the ledge above the run. 2 days of cruise, then Hazel brought the flood and they stood them down. The file has letters from the mother, 2 years after, asking if anyone found anything she could hold. Answer stamped no. Aislinn looked at the whistle in her hand, then at the spring that fed the run. The water wore a sheen of leaves thin enough to count. She keyed the mic. Found a whistle near the spring house. Will bag it. Doubt it has any forensic value after 6 decades, but a photograph might matter to someone. As she spoke, a figure eased out of the trees upstream. A man in the brown and green of a ranger uniform, but the cut of it was wrong in a way you can feel even if you do not have the words. The shirt had pockets like ideas, the hat sat stiff as a rule book, he carried a strap radio that looked like a lunch pail with an antenna. He exhaled, then stopped when he saw her. "Ma'am," he said. There was a formality in the syllables, like church on a day that hurt. "We're sweeping the east slope." The boy's father said he was right here. He pointed at the stones, as if pointing could anchor the earth. Aislinn stood very still. The man's face had the smoothness of someone who had not yet had reason to learn what whiskey was for. His name tag said M. Elwood. His shoulder patch bore an American shield with a tree she did not recognize. He glanced down at her radio and then at the whistle in her hand. "You with us?" he asked. "You with Fox Hollow?" Aislinn's throat did the dry swallow of a person whose mind is faster than her words. "Yes," she said, because yes was easier than telling a man with a lunch pail radio about the word digital. "I heard your call." "Where are your lines?" "At the ridge," he said, puzzled by the question. "We got men cutting sign along the deer trails. We got women at base keeping track of names. The disaster man out of Charlottesville told us Hazel will give us until dawn and then gone." He looked past her to the ledge, his jaw a small square against the warm air. "Mother is at the church in Syria, not the far one, the one with the bell rope that sticks. She keeps asking if he had a jacket. She wants the question to be a fact." A gust moved through the trees on some business of its own. Aislinn felt the air change around the bones of the rocks. The man looked at her again, and the little muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Your radio," he said. "You get this out to anyone else." "Yes." "We have a tower at Hazeltop. They know. Someone is coming." "Good," he said softly. Then he put 2 fingers to his brow. an old salute done halfway because distance is difficult to respect when the ground is asking for more of you. He stepped past her, boots exact on the damp leaves, and moved toward the ledge, listening with his face. He put a hand out as if to feel a draft. His outline lightened as if the warm air had decided he belonged to it. The forest made the sound of a coat hem brushed along a pew. He was gone. Aislinn stood, her hands empty now that the whistle had weight inside a bag. She did not call after him because naming a thing makes it pick a room and leave all the others. She climbed the slope above the spring house, careful, testing each foot. The ground showed her where it had let go before. The soil had slumped sometime between 1954 and now a scar that trees had tried to stitch. She scoped along the edge and thought about the father leaving for a jacket, a boy with a whistle and a spring that talks even when wind tells it not to. Dupre's SUV nosed into the pull-off as the last of the light left, and the storm made its speech. Jericho Dupre had shoulders like a doorframe and a way of stepping onto ground as if asking permission. He carried 2 headlamps and a calm that turned wind into a task rather than a threat. "You heard it too," he said, by way of greeting. "I did, twice. Then it came again down at the spring house. I found this." She held up the bag. The whistle swung on its string, dull as an old firmament. He took the bag and looked as if it could tell him how to think. He listened. The wind pushed down the hollow. The radio hissed, then thought better of it. He nodded at the ledge. "If it were mine to write," he said, "I would say, slip." The file says gusty before hazel. A child with a small sense of infinity walks the line twice to see if the sound changes along the water. It does. He steps where the deer stepped, and the hill remembers it owes the river a favor. Aislinn told him about the ranger with the lunch pail radio. Jericho had been in the park long enough to have a story for everything and to respect none of them fully. Fox Hollow was an unofficial name for the old maintenance yard near Syria in the 50s. He said, the way a person does when they are agreeing with the possibility of a ghost to be polite. There is a cinder pad there with the marks of 4 posts, like a tower. The radios would have been handsets the size of a Bible that could make clouds sound like news. People back then wrote reports thick with nouns. They did not trust adjectives unless a man had bled. He held the bag with the whistle for an extra breath. He set it in his crew pocket. They searched until rain made the ground decide to be a different kind of ground. In light from their headlamps, the trees stood at attention, counseling caution. They ran a short line grid above the ledge, more to be able to say they had used the dark well than because they expected the earth to give up a long-ago truth for free. At 9, the radios called them home before the lightning made the argument personal. Karen met Aislinn at the office with a printout. The file had been scanned, crooked, and the edges were black, where the copier had tried to keep history from fraying. The incident commander's name was printed in a firm hand, M. Elwood. A note in the margin had been added later in pencil. Mother moved to Luray in 67, father deceased, no closure letter sent. The pencil note was signed with a small initial A and a dot. Aislinn slept at the bunkhouse with the radio on her nightstand like a dog. She dreamed that paper flapped along a clothesline strung between trees, and she walked the line, reading every letter, her feet lined up on the rocks of the run, the paper turning to leaves as she read. At 3 in the morning, she woke to the noise a storm makes when it finally accepts its job. The world beyond the window went white, then black, then white again. She turned the volume down to half. She watched the rain write gloss on the sill. The radio stayed quiet. At 10, the day pulled itself together into rags. Aislinn drove down to Luray to a blue house where the porch had a swing, and the swing had 2 cushions that had learned how to be rain. She had a name from the file and a phone number that still worked, to her surprise. A woman in her 80s opened the door with the careful welcome reserved for officials who might be good news or could be kind even if they were not. "I am Aislinn Keats," she said, ranger with Shenandoah. "I am here because a storm pulled a thread and we saw where it ran." The woman corrected her posture and straightened the collar of her cardigan as if a story would take her picture. "My name is Tilda Whitcomb," she said. "We did not know how to leave him there, so we stayed." I have a loaf of banana bread that forgot the raisins on purpose if you are the kind of visitor who does not mind crumbs. Aislinn sat at a round table so clean it looked like a rule. The banana bread was honest, the tea was strong. Tilda put her hand on the tablecloth and kept it there as if the cloth would be steadier if it knew she was not going anywhere. She said the name Harlan like a stake you drive into ground so the tent knows where to stand. He whistled 3 notes, Tilda said. The tune the train plays when it comes into Luray, because his father used to take him to the crossing and they would wave at the men who stand like saints. 3 notes and then he would laugh because he was practiced at laughing. The wind took the notes and did not give them back. My husband ran to the car and the sky changed. They told him on the radio he had until morning. You can live your whole life in a sentence like that. Aislinn put the bagged whistle on the table. The string looped like a sleeping thing. Tilda did not reach for it. She looked at it as one looks at an old photograph that has learned how to move. I did not get a letter, she said, and smiled small to prove she was not accusing. I understand how papers behave. I was a clerk before my hands forgot to love the carbon paper. I suppose I wrote a letter in my head every day for 2 years. Then I stopped asking out loud. You cannot keep asking the same question without turning into a different person. The whistle sat, silent, older than most of the kitchen. Tilda looked out the window and the window looked back. A red cardinal landed on the feeder and told everyone, rudely, that it had arrived. Tilda laughed at the bird, and the laugh made her look like a photograph of herself. Aislinn asked about the ranger named Elwood. Tilda's eyes softened. Martin Elwood went to our church, she said. He was the kind of man who knocked on the door with his hat in both hands. He brought us a bag of oranges at Christmas and apologized as if the oranges had failed to be children. He wrote the report because that is what he could do, and he built a cinder block box for the tower that was not a tower, and then he got quiet like men do when they find out the world can keep a thing from them and they still have to go to work. Back in the truck, Aislinn let the radio hum. Big Meadows asked Pinnacles to send a set of cones to mile marker 62. A bear stared down a minivan with an intensity that made the parents breathe like swimmers. Life had resumed its insistence. She turned the truck toward the old maintenance yard near Syria, the one Jericho half remembered as a place with 4 posts and a name more rumor than rule. There was a cinder pad there for sure, now half invaded by chickweed and ambition. Someone had collected beer cans along the edge and arranged them by brand into a timeline. Aislinn walked the perimeter and crouched at a corner where the concrete had spalled enough to show a rebar smile. She brushed the dirt aside with one hand. A penny lay there. The year was 1954. She laughed, because a park and a story will sometimes give you too many symbols and you have to choose which to be corny about. The wind rose toward evening. The radio stayed in this decade, obedient and dull. Aislinn drove the ridge road, watching the color slide toward Bruce. Back at the office, Karen handed her a thin envelope with a stamped return address that made Aislinn's scalp feel like it had learned something. It was from an amateur radio club in Harrisonburg, a man who had heard the show Aislinn, sometimes called During Slow Nights, the one where listeners told stories of radios hearing the wrong things on purpose. We pick up oddities when the weather steeps the air, the man had written. Old distress calls, ham tests bounced off airplane wings, bombers from the 40s practicing. Once, a train dispatch from 1960 rolled through on a rain so thick you could chew it. There are names for this, and none of them explain it. The way I think of it is this. Time breathes shallow near storms. If a voice was loud enough once and the same air returns, you might hear a ghost that is not a ghost. Not dead, not alive, just not finished talking. That night, Aislinn drove down to Corbin Run one last time with a single job. She stood by the spring house and held the whistle. She did not put it to her lips because it belonged to a mouth that had done its work. She set it on the stone in the square of water smell and said a sentence Tilda had given her permission to say. Harlan, your mother sits with a red bird and forgives the form and the weather. We leave you where you are, not lost now. We know the place that held you. We will name it, even if the stone refuses to. Thunder argued with a ridge to the west. Aislinn picked up the whistle, tucked it back into the bag, and snapped the bag shut the way you close a letter you cannot ignore any longer. Her radio breathed and then found words. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Search secured. Weather has moved us. We will resume when it lets us. Families headed to shelter. If anyone finds a whistle, mark the spot. End of report, October 14, 1954. Aislinn lifted the handset to her mouth and did not speak. The silence she chose felt like respect, not fear. She held the radio until the voice faded into the music of rain. Then she climbed the hill back to the truck. The park wrote its own ending. Winter stripped the ridge to bones. Spring came with its first honest green. In May, a blowdown above Corbin Run sent a sycamore through the soil like a spoon and revealed a ledger of stones that had not seen light since Eisenhower. A student volunteer named Leda, working off a citation from a noisy night, found 2 marbles wedged into the roots where the ground had been a child's pocket. One was blue as the ridge on a clear day. One was green as a first leaf. They were bagged, labeled, cataloged. The ranger who filled out the form wrote found near the old stone spring house, Corbin Run, coordinates to follow. The park historian wrote a small note and signed it with a letter that looked like an A and a dot. Aislinn drove to Luray with the marbles and the whistle and a copy of the incident report with Martin Elwood's name on it. Tilda put her hand flat on the table again. She looked at the marbles and did not touch them. She touched the paper instead, the ink, the line that said, "Weather degenerating." She said Harlan's name until it stopped feeling like an apology. She picked up the whistle, finally, and put it to her ear as if listening to metal were a normal thing, and perhaps it is. Some evenings after that, if you drove Skyline Drive near mile marker 47 and rolled your window down, you could feel a warm breath slide into your car even when the air was sound and cool. It was not spooky, it was geology and a mistake and a memory. At the spring house, a ranger tied a ribbon to a low limb that matched the color of the marbles, bright enough to be seen and quiet enough to be ignored by anyone who did not need a reason to pause. The ribbon got replaced each year by whoever remembered. Martin Elwood's name found its way into the little museum at Big Meadows on a card next to an old lunch pail radio and a photo of the old Fox Hollow cinder pad with 4 ghostly post holes. Next to it, a thin slice of paper, a carbon copy of a letter whose original had been lost. The letter said, "Dear Mrs. Whitcomb, we are sorry we did not find your boy to bring him home. We did not stop looking until weather and hope told us to stop. He was last seen by the spring house that feeds Corbin Run. If you come to the park, a ranger will show you the stones." The letter was signed in a hand that did not know how to be neat and still be sincere. M. Elwood. Every now and then, on the radio, in the kind of weather that puts a lid on the hollows and makes the ridgelight a ghost, Aislinn would hear a wash of sound that reminded her of a man with a careful voice calling to his crew. She never keyed the mic until it faded. She let the air finish its sentence. She would step out of the truck and breathe the warm breath held in the cut. She would look toward the run that kept talking to the river under the leaves. She would say what she had learned to say when a story meets a place and refuses to end, just because the people in it have "thank you quietly" to the air. Then she would drive on, a little slower than before, as if a child were walking along the edge of her attention and she had decided to step back from the edge too. If you are listening from a place where the weather is steady, imagine a ridge crouched under a storm and a voice from a year you have to say out loud, not with numbers, but with breath. 1954. Hazel. Fox Hollow. A boy with a train's 3 notes in his mouth. A ranger with a lunch pail radio who pressed his fingers to his brow as if holding in his head all the ways a hill can keep a thing. Imagine the way a whistle feels in an old hand. Imagine the way a mother sits at a table and forgives a paper for being paper. Imagine the square of stones where water has no choice but to tell you where it is going. Then, tonight, when your own house makes its old noises and your clocks tame the hour into a number, let 1 minute expand for a voice that is not finished. Listen the whole time. Let the warm air pass across your face and do not name it. When it is done, say thank you and mean it. Then go to sleep. The hills will keep watch. The radios will behave until they do not, and even then, what they bring may be kinder than you fear. Neighbors heard a piano at 3 amperes. M. The house was empty. Neighbors heard it first at 3 in the morning. A piano coming through the thin savanna fog, like a voice behind gauze. Bright, deliberate, not a practice scale, but a song shaped by hands that knew what they were asking the instrument to feel. Windows glowed weakly along Jones Street. Porch fans turned lazily, pushing warm air that smelled like iron and rain. The music came from number 119, the Carpenter House, which stood empty, locked, listed, and waiting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2019, late August, heat pressing the city flat. The Carpenter House had been vacant since early summer, after an estate sale peeled it of rugs and lamps and the porcelain spaniel that used to guard the hearth. The last owner, a retired piano teacher named Odile Carpenter, had passed in late spring. Her nieces lived up in North Carolina, good people by all accounts, but too far away to keep fresh flowers on the mantel. Realtors came and went with their careful smiles. Contractors measured crown molding and murmured about old wiring. But at 3 in the morning, the house was nobody's, and then very suddenly, everyone's. Caius Mercer lived across the street in an apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cedar oil. He was 37, a sign painter by trade, a listener by habit. At 3:02, he stepped onto his balcony with a glass of water and a small, unreasonable hope that the sound would be a radio left on in a passing car. It wasn't. It had the weight of wood and felt and string. It had the soft percussive bloom that only happens when hammers strike and then get out of the way. He thought of the names of pieces like someone reciting Saints, Nocturne, Arabesque, Consolation, and then recognized the one it was. Claire de Lune played a hair slower than most, with crescendos that rose like someone standing up carefully from an old chair. He could hear the rubato in the right hand, the left hand anchoring, a conversation between patience and longing. The melody reached for the air over Forsyth Park and came back with a question. Caius put on shoes. On the sidewalk, humidity wrapped him in a damp shawl. Moths battered the street lamp. Down the block, a delivery truck sighed at a stop sign. The music continued. Not perfect, not sloppy. Human. Nora Bly stepped from the shadows of her courtyard with a leash looped around her wrist, her old hound Amos peering from behind her knees. Nora was 68, the kind of neighbor who knows who is supposed to be where and when. She tilted her head. Your radio. Her voice made it a question. Or is that in the house? It's in the house, Caius said, and the words made the night hold itself differently. They were not the only ones. Mr. Patel from the corner bodega came up the steps wiping flour from his hands because insomnia likes small projects, and he had been making dough for morning pastries. On the second floor of a yellow clapboard place, a girl in a college sweatshirt cracked her window and frowned. An Uber drifted past and slowed. Even the driver leaned, listening. At 3:08, Nora called it in. She had a way with dispatchers, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. House is listed vacant, number 119 Jones. We have audible music consistent with a live piano. We are gathering out front. Please send a unit to clear the property. She gave her name, spelled it, gave her number, spelled it, and ended the call with thank you in a tone that made the words into a promise. 2 patrol cars rolled up at 3:17. Blue lights turned low so they washed the houses in a suggestion instead of a demand. Officer Malik Rhodes took the steps 2 at a time, his hair braided neatly, a scar like a grace note at the corner of his mouth. Behind him came Officer Lori Fenwick, steady and compact, the kind of person who never lost track of where the nearest door was. They paused at the front door. The music did not pause. In the short stillness between measures, you could hear the damp city breathing. Let me try the realtor box first, Fenwick said. Odile's nieces had left a lockbox hooked to the iron rail. Fenwick called the on-call number posted on the yard sign, woke a man named Barrett, whose voice came up out of sleep like a diver out of deep water, and got the code. She opened the box, palmed the key, glanced at Rhodes. He nodded. She unlocked the door. Inside, the air moved in waves. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and old paper. A staircase curved up like a question mark. To the left, the front parlor opened wide, and there, by the tall window, sat the piano that had not found a buyer. A nabe grand, walnut, its lid propped, its harp gleaming like a good secret. The bench was pulled out, the fallboard was up. No one sat there. But the song did not stop. Rhodes stepped closer, palms open, as if approaching an animal. Fenwick circled wide, eyes on corners and thresholds. Rhodes leaned and looked under the body of the piano the way a child looks under a bed. Empty. No pedals depressed. No one hiding. The music flowed with the serene confidence of someone who had forgotten to be afraid. The keys moved. Not all of them, just the ones the melody asked for, but they moved as surely as if struck by fingers. Rhodes watched a middle C rise and fall. He put his hand near the key, not touching, feeling only the movement of warm air. He swallowed. His throat made a sound like a small door closing. Player mechanism, Mr. Patel whispered from the doorway, half hopeful. Some have rolls hidden in the belly. Rhodes eased the bench back with his shin and lifted the front panel below the keys. Inside, felted hammers, whips, jacks, springs, everything that makes a grand, no motor, no roll. No belts, just the old generous mechanics of wood and intention. He let the panel fall softly back into place. The music reached the place where the melody thins into light. Fenwick walked the ground floor with calm hands and an efficient gaze. Dining room empty, kitchen empty, pantry empty, back door closed, latched, chain intact, powder room lonely and clean. Upstairs, a short hall with 2 bedrooms and a study. She went up. Caius waited in the foyer, pulse in his wrists. The house sighed the way old houses do when strangers put weight on old boards. A ceiling ticked. Somewhere a pipe tapped. The piano did not care. It turned a corner into the passage that always lands too beautifully, and Caius felt something behind his ribs try to stand up. Fenwick returned. No one, she said. Windows latched, closets filled with air and dust. She cut a look at the instrument. The song decelerated like a train entering a station and came to its hush of an ending. The final chord hung and softened and then quiet. They all stood there for the kind of moment that takes its shoes off before it enters a room. Savannah shifted outside. Moths performed their soft violence at the glass. Across the street, a cat made a decision and took it back. Rhodes ran his hand along the piano's cheek as if it were a horse. He said, "I'm going to log this as an unsecured property check, no suspect found, no damage, no sign of forced entry. We'll notify the realtor to have a locksmith rekey and to secure the back windows." He looked at Nora. "We can sit on the block a while. If it plays again, call." Nora nodded. She had that way of nodding that promises she will do more than that. At 4, the block slept with one eye open. At 5, milk trucks wrote their notes on the morning. By 7, Rhodes had told the story to a sergeant who smiled with one corner of his mouth and said, "The city has old bones. Let it have old songs." By 11, Barrett had a locksmith on a ladder checking sashes and pins. At noon, a pair of teenagers in black shirts, tagged with the name of a moving company, carried a rolled rug out to a van and joked too loudly about ghosts the way kids do when they hope fear will think they're busy and pass them by. That night, at 3:01, the music began again. Not Debussy. The opening was older, the cadence stiffer, a Bach sarabande measured like footsteps on a tile floor. Slow, precise, inevitable. Neighbors emerged as if called by the same small bell. Caius took the steps 2 at a time. Nora did not bother with shoes. Officer Rhodes arrived inside 3 minutes, not even pretending he had not parked around the corner to make it easier to be the kind of cop he wanted to be. They found the same room, the same instrument, the same absence of anyone at all. The keys rose and fell, a metronome's mind and a prayer's heart. Rhodes stood at the tail, hand on the rim, feeling the sympathetic thrum in his palm. He mouthed to Fenwick, "You feel that?" and she nodded, jaw tight. When the sarabande ended, there was a brief, polite silence, as if the empty room expected applause. The house had a history, of course. In Savannah, houses accumulate story the way live oaks gather Spanish moss, one breath, and you are clothed in what came before you. Odile Carpenter had bought the name in 1974 with her first real paycheck from the conservatory where she taught. She had trained generations of children to curve their fingers like gentle pals, to count out loud, to breathe through nerves. She had hosted small recitals in the front parlor, little boys in stiff collars, little girls with bows that smiled even when they didn't. Caius knew this because in the weeks after the second night, he took to visiting old Mrs. Beaumont on the next block, who had been Odile's friend since summer dresses cost less than a bus ticket. He brought her ginger tea, she brought him names. Odile did not marry, Mrs. Beaumont said, with the complicated pride some women use to say a woman chose herself. Odile did not need to. She kept afternoons for students and evenings for pieces she wanted to meet again. If you heard music after midnight, it was because her mind had decided to go walking and her hands did not want her to go alone. Caius asked about family, about nieces, about anyone who might have keys. Mrs. Beaumont leaned back. The nieces did right by her. But Odile's real legacy is in the wrists of children, who can now make a room ask for mercy. She smiled. If the house is playing at 3, maybe it's just remembering how to talk. The third night brought rain hard enough to erase chalk from sidewalks. The piano began at 3:04 with something American Copland, maybe open and upright as a prairie. The left-hand octaves came like fence posts along a road. Rhodes stood in the hall, dripping on the polished heart pine, and felt the hair along his arms think the thought it thinks before it stands. The sound was too clear, too present, to be a speaker hidden somewhere. He pressed his ear against the underside of the keyboard, reckless and gentle all at once, and listened there. He heard woodworking, felt creak and give. He pulled back and swallowed rain. Fenwick called the lab, not because lab techs solve hauntings, but because she trusted men and women who make their living saying, this is a fact and this is not. The lab sent a sound engineer on the 4th night. He arrived with a small case and an undramatic face, set up microphones, and mapped the way the sound bloomed in the room. He traced it like a weather system. He shook his head, not unhappily. It's a piano, all right. It's hammers striking strings. The waveforms don't lie. He gestured at the action, the fallboard, the keys. If it isn't a person, it's a mechanism I have never met. You'd think it was a player, Mr. Patel offered again, stubborn as a superstition that used to keep you safe. But where's the roll? Nora crouched and put her palm flat on the bare floor in front of the lyre, breath held like a child listening to a secret inside a seashell. She looked up. Feel that. They all did. Not a vibration exactly, more like a miniature version of thunder when it is far and polite. As if the house were a body with a heart beating very, very softly. Caius began to arrive early, at 2:45, with a folding chair and a thermos. He took notes in a small pad he used when hand-lettering menus for restaurants. Tempo, piece, weather, number of listeners. He discovered that the set lists, if that is what they were, made a kind of sense. Debussy the first night, liquid and moonbitten, Bach the second, exacting and austere, American the third, shoulders back. On the 5th night came Chopin, a nocturne in E minor that stepped like someone finding their way through their own house in the dark without turning on the light. On the 6th, Satie, that famous gymnopédie that sounds like someone remembering a conversation and only later realizing what they should have said. On the 7th night, the piano did not play. At 3 o'clock, the block held its breath, and then, shy or wise, let it go. Caius packed his chair, embarrassed at his own hope. Nora turned on her porch light and then, half smiling, turned it back off. The realtor, nervous about liability, scheduled a full inspection the next day. A structural guy with hands like shovels walked the joists and hummed. A piano tech from Tybee Island arrived with a satchel and a reverence. He took the action apart and laid its bones gently on a quilt. He showed them the jacks, the whippins, the flanges. He pressed dampers against strings, counted, and pronounced the instrument healthy for its age and history. He found only one oddity, and it was not mechanical. Tucked inside the case, caught between the soundboard and a brace, was a small envelope the color of tea. It had been there a long time. On the front, in Odile's hand. For the person who hears it, the room forgot how to breathe for a second. The piano tech handed the envelope to Barrett, who handed it to Nora, who looked at Caius and then at Officer Rhodes and said, "You better." Caius opened it. Inside, one page in a tight, old-fashioned script. "If you are reading this, you are listening," Odile had written. "If you are listening, you may hear what most houses forget to say out loud. I have taught many to count. I have taught some to sing. I have failed some and forgiven myself slowly. I left the piano because I could not bear the idea of it being lonely if I took it somewhere that did not know this air. If it plays when I am gone, let it. If it stops, let it rest. I have, in the middle of the night, heard keys move under my hands without me having asked them to. I have believed this was grief, and then believed it was kindness, and then believed it was just the way wood remembers being a tree. If you must name it, call it practice." The letter ended with a short list of pieces she loved at 3 in the morning and a small instruction in parentheses that was not, in fact, written with those marks, but with Odile's own delicate dashes. "Leave the north window a finger's width open when it is not raining. The instrument likes to hear the live oaks whisper." That night, clouds flew low, too hurried to stay. At 2:59, Caius propped the north window, only a sliver, just enough for the air to acknowledge the room. At 3, nothing. At 3:01, the first notes of the Goldberg variations rose and unbuttoned the dark. Savannah kept her manners. Crowds did not gather. People did not shout or film with the kind of greed that makes things smaller. They sat on stoops with mugs. They stood in hallways with their hands around their own wrists, the way people stand with themselves at wakes. The police came when called, then stayed uncalled. Barrett, the realtor, began to arrive too, not because it helped sell the house, but because he had not known a job could include being present for something that did not ask for money. On the 10th night, a woman in a green raincoat stopped on the front steps and did not come inside. She was in her 40s, hair cut short for hot weather, hands with a musician's map of callous and grace. When the piece ended, a Schubert impromptu that made the room softly astonished, she said, quietly, "Odile?" Mrs. Beaumont, hearing it, came in on Caius's arm and said the name, the way a friend says it when the friend is late on purpose. "Juniper Miles," she said, "piano class of 1997, the only student Odile ever called ferocious." Juniper smiled and made a face that admitted both pride and apology. "I left for Chicago and then for everywhere else. I did not come back when I should have. I am here now." She looked at the nave. "May I?" The house gathered itself. Juniper sat on the bench, didn't touch for a count of 5, then set her fingers where they had learned once to listen. She played something that did not need a name, the way warm water does not need a name when you have been cold too long. In the middle of the phrase, a note moved that she had not struck. It came into the chord like a clever friend inserting a joke. Juniper laughed under her breath, cheeks wet, and shifted. The instrument and the woman spoke for a while like people who had promised not to argue and then argued anyway and then remembered why they loved each other. It went on for 3 weeks. Not every night, not on demand. Sometimes the house slept. Sometimes the city rained too hard for even ghosts to be heard. Sometimes a siren ran its thin salt line down the block and the piano waited until the sound had passed. Once, in the middle of a storm that made the gutters spit, it played a lullaby Odile had composed for a boy named Manu in 1986 when his mother was sick and he kept falling asleep on the bench. Mrs. Beaumont recognized it and cried without bothering to hide it. The story found its small, polite way into the paper, 2 paragraphs on page 3, written by a local reporter who understood that fact and wonder are not enemies. The headline used the word mystery because that is the word that lets everyone keep their peace. No one mocked, no one tried to monetize. In a city that sells its own past by the scoop, that was a kind of miracle. On the last night, October arrived dressed as September's tired sister. The air cooled, the live oaks shook their sleeves. Caius woke at 2:40, not startled, just called. He walked across the street, unlocked the door with the realtor's blessing, and sat in the dark. He did not bring a thermos. He did not bring his pad. At 3, the piano did not start. At 3:03, either a 3:05. At 3:07, a tiny sound, not a key, not a pedal. Cloth on wood. Juniper stepped into the parlor and took her place. She played the lighthouse song from someone else's life, then Odil's favorite warm-up, then something Caius could not place that sounded like forgiveness given gently and not all at once. In the second page, a breeze from the north window touched the back of his neck, a key depressed that her fingers had not chosen. Juniper did not correct it. She smiled and let the note belong. When it ended, the city had the particular quiet of a decision. Juniper stood, laid her hand on the fallboard, and moved it down slowly until the keys were covered. She did not latch it. She turned to Caius and Nora and Rhodes and Mrs. Beaumont and Barrett and Mr. Patel and the handful of others who had become the kind of congregation that forms without a bulletin. She said, "There," and it sounded like a benediction. The piano did not play at 3 after that. Not the next night, not the next week, not in November when the air remembered how to be crisp, not in December when wreaths hung and college students went home and someone left a red scarf on the iron gate and no one took it because it looked like it belonged to the fence. The house stayed empty and not empty, listed and not for long, a property and a promise. In late January, a family bought it, a dental hygienist named Leora with a laugh that took the corners off bad news. Her husband, Arlo, who repaired old radios and believed sound should be coaxed and not forced. Their daughter, Elowen 6, who walked into the front parlor, saw the nabe, put both hands flat on its cheek, and said, "Hello," as if greeting a very old dog. Juniper came on a Saturday with a claw-footed lamp Odile had loved and set it by the window without being asked. Sometimes, walking home from the shop, Caius would slow by the gate. He would hear scales around dinner time, small fingers finding middle C, laughter at wrong notes, the stern patience of a mother counting. Once, later than practice, earlier than worry, he heard a phrase of Debussy float through the sliver of the north window and thought, not possessively, but with gratitude, you kept one thing the way it liked to be. Every now and then, at 3 in the morning, he would wake, because the body remembers the hour it learned to lean forward. He would listen. The city would give him what the city gives. A siren's shrug, a train's whisper, the far scrape of a palm frond on a gutter. He would not hear the piano. He would hear instead that quieter, deeper thing. A house that had been asked to keep a story and had kept it as long as it needed keeping, and then, with good manners and a bow, set it down. If you ever pass Jones Street near 3, look up. Someone might be washing a glass, someone might be turning a page. Someone might be dreaming a tune with their hands open on the covers. And in number 119, a girl might be asleep on the sofa with sheet music like a blanket, the north window left a finger's width open, the live oaks telling secrets in a language no one invented and everyone somehow understands. You could say nothing happened here. A vacant house made noise until it didn't. Keys moved and then they were still. Or you could say a small piece of the world did its best impression of grace and a few ordinary people showed up in time to hear it. Both things can be true. Both are enough. Wherever you are, whatever hour your own house favors, if you hear a song that has no source, let it finish, then wait one breath longer than you think you need. Sometimes, in that extra beat, you will feel the floor answer the air the way a body answers its name. And if you cannot name it, if the sensible part of you demands a mechanism, call it practice. Then stand in the doorway and be the kind of neighbor who listens. The hotel room that prints receipts at 2, 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the two-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5B printed receipts at 2:17, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across. He read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept the ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber-banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid, but the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 2:17 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 2:17, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, "Why 2:17?" Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled at 2. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says, anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own. But I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said, the kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortails network roamed like a polite guess slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names, again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks, baby sleeps light, keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, Legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortails aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weatherwoman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been 2 buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time. He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the scissortails switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. "You shouldn't be alive," he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. "Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops." She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. "Let me listen once more," she said. "Then, if it's a loop, we cut it. The third night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them." Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, "Haunted Bar Bill." And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, "I love you, but weirdness is your brand." At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in, Adelaine Merritt. Rate, comp, room, 5B. Arrival, the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in, Quince Palmer. Rate, $9.50. Room, 309. Arrival, the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine, 2 turns down, but behind it all, she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The Scissortail was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, Francis Motor Lodge, C1959, Night Manager. Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The fourth night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2, 17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. I hear you, she said softly. I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here. The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off, as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adelaine kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adelaine believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We can not run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 217 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute. She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adelaine roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. The road that GPS refuses to map, locals avoid it. They call it limestone cut on county maps, but no map app will take you there. Not in daylight, not at 3 in the morning, not even if you stand at the mouth of the lane with full bars and beg your phone like a superstitious traveler. The line of asphalt slips off Route 27 near the Ohio River, just past a caved-in orchard and a billboard for a roadside Jesus that no longer stands. In person, the turn is ordinary. On a screen, it is missing, as if the road and the world had decided to keep a small secret between them. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This is in southeastern Ohio, down in Gallia County, where the hills go soft and the river carries towboats like patient thoughts. The year was 2022, late September. Goldenrod along the guardrails. Soybean fields gone the color of toast. I drove there on a Friday after work because a listener named Thayer Lorne had written to me with a subject line that felt like a dare. The road your GPS refuses to map. Locals avoid it. Please come before the county pours gravel again. Thayer was not a crank. She taught second grade in a brick school with a playground that leaned into a sycamore's shade. She coached a Lego league. She used the word prudent in a way that made you want to be. Her email listed dates and names the way people list ingredients. 2 wrecks in 2 years, 1 missing signage, 1 strange call to the sheriff's office just after midnight in late June. She did not say haunted, she said wrong. I left Columbus at 4:30 with a thermos of coffee and a box of gas station crackers and the kind of optimism you only get on a 2-lane in fall. South on 23, east on 35. The sun slung low behind me, the way good music hides its effort. By 7:15, I rolled past Vinton's courthouse with its white clock face turning the hour into a suggestion. I kept the radio quiet. In the passenger seat, the county plat book rode buckled like a fussy child. I could feel the river before I could see it, the way the air saturated and the smell of damp earth put its hand on your shoulder. I reached the turn at dusk. Limestone Cut was marked by a county sign that had once been green and was now a speculation. A locked gate blocked a gravel spur to the right, but the paved lane went on unbothered, as if all gates were for other people. My phone sat in the cup holder, showing me nothing. The blue line ended in a gray shrug. I tried 3 apps. Same shrug. The plat book said the road existed, had always existed, and ran 2 miles east to a decommissioned ferry landing that had not seen a ferry since 1978. The app said, find another way. Thayer's warning lived in my pocket. Locals avoid it after dark. They say it runs warm. They say it has more turns than it used to. They say tires squeal on dry asphalt, without your foot agreeing? The first 100 yards were ordinary. Willow and ash. An old fence stapled to posts that leaned like tired men at a bus stop. The air smelled faintly of limestone and wet leaves. Then the temperature did a small, undeniable thing. It rose. Not a gust, not a patch of sun through trees, a steady, even climb that lapped over my forearms and stayed. I glanced at the dash. Outside temp read 64, rising to 68, then 71. The date on the dash glowed September 23rd. The time said 7:47 and slipped to 7:50 without being asked. I lowered the window to let the river air in. The warm beat met the cool and negotiated a truce that left sweat at my hairline. A bend. Another. The road narrowed until it felt like a confession. The trees grew close enough to see where vines had taught them to bow. I rolled slower. A small bridge came into view, wood deck, steel truss. A sign nailed to a poplar announced one lane in letters that had been painted by someone who believed in understatements. Beyond the bridge, the road ripple curved through a cut so tight the rock faces wore each other's dust. I stopped before the bridge, because I am not brave so much as careful. I set the hazard lights flashing red into green. I listened. A train whispered somewhere upriver. Crickets laid a steady carpet of sound over everything. From the cut, a thin metallic note like cooling machinery. The warm air possessed a sweetness I could not name immediately. Jams and canning season came to mind. Then the word arrived. Apples. Not Honeycrisp and not cider. Fallen apples. Ferment thinking about becoming something else. I took my notebook and recorded the details the way you do when you want the future to trust your memory. Time, temperature, smell, no wind, no other cars. Then I drove across the planks and felt the boards answer the tires like a breath under my feet. The cut rose. The hill pressed close. A corner went tighter than it looked on the approach. My rear tires slid a fraction, not enough to call it a slide, enough to make my throat say a quiet word I would not put in print. The steering wheel thudded softly, as if there were two wheels telling me two slightly different stories about straight. I eased. I took the next bend slower. There is a point in a road where the land decides whether you are a guest or a problem. Limestone cut decided I was a slow guest and tolerated me. The warm air leveled at 76, then climbed another couple of ticks. The smell of apples deepened into something like a recipe, cinnamon without spice, yeast without bread. I passed a turnout with two straight ruts that led into grass and ended at a log older than my car. A shape hung from a branch ahead. I braked. It was a memorial. Crossed from cedar rails wired together, silk flowers that had learned to be brave in rain, photos in a sleeve of plastic tacked below a name printed on glossy paper. Mireille Pasque, 19, a date in October 2020. Below it, a line her father must have chosen, the road that brought you home. I got out. The heat met me like a body. My phone tried to show me bars, then tried not to. A moth hit the hazard light and changed its mind. I stood with my hands in my pockets and felt the place balance itself on me. When I turned across the road, I noticed another set of flowers half hidden in blackberry cane. The name blew up at me when wind finally remembered how. Osric Vales, 21, May 2021. Same line. The road that brought you home. I walked farther along the cut until it opened like a sigh. The lane flattened to a seam along a scrim of meadow that used to be something else. You can tell by how grass lies. If it grows with a memory of rose, something stood there before. The sky went the color of a bruise, deciding between night and purple. A light flickered ahead, low and steady.